So kettlebells. A lot of people use kettlebells nowadays. Kettlebells are the hot tool, the hot workout tool in America. But the way kettlebells are used predominantly is that they're used very similar to a bodybuilding tool, very similar to a dumbbell. A lot of the movements you're going to do can be mimicked using a dumbbell or a barbell, which is fine because it's a little different. It gives a little bit of a novelty to the movement. But from what I've found in the few years that I've been using kettlebells and the education and training that I've gotten, kettlebells, I feel that you get the most bang for your buck with kettlebells when you do them for long sets, high rep, long sets. And particularly because a kettlebell is a fixed weight. So if you want to focus on strength training, use a barbell or a dumbbell. That you can progressively add smaller weights to it, and you can increase your load over time. You get stronger. With a fixed weight, you can't do that. You just got a fixed weight. So what do? You lift it more times than you did last time. The kettlebell lifts in competition. The kettlebell lifts mimic the Olympic weightlifting lifts. So in Olympic weightlifting, you've got the clean and jerk, and you've got the snatch. Those are the same exact lifts that you use when you compete with kettlebells. Olympic weightlifting on one end of the spectrum is 1 rep max, as heavy as you can go for a single rep. Get that weight on overhead. Kettlebells, it's the far end of the spectrum on the other side where you're going, in competition, you've got 10 minutes, and you're allowed to go 10 minutes as long as you don't put that kettlebell down. Try to get as many reps as possible. So here you're talking about high reps. On the other side, from Olympic weightlifting, you're talking about single rep. I've written up here just a little background for you, so just so you have something to look at and you can take a look. So Kettlebell Sport, if you go on YouTube or you do any kind of searches on the web, if you look up kettlebells, you might see Kettlebell Sport. You might see something called GS. And GS is kind of like a community nickname for Kettlebell Sport. GS stands for Girovoy Sport. Girovoy is the Russian name for kettlebells. So if you didn't know, kettlebells and kettlebell sport and kettlebell lifting all came out of Russia. So back in the 50s or so, the Russians actually made this actually the national sport of Russia way back when, and they came out with all the ranking tables and all kinds of stuff. Prior to that, where did it come from? Well, there's a lot of stories, but they talk about the Russian farmers who would all, at the end of the day, bring their crops to the market, and they'd all weigh them. And what did they use for the scales? But the weights that looked like kettlebells. So they would use those to weigh their crops out, and then they would sit around and drink vodka, and they'd get drunk, and they'd start betting each other how many times they could lift the weight up, and that kind of developed into, that's the story. So it all comes out of Russia. Girovoy Sport is you'll hear GS. So in the kettlebell world, the people the mainstreamers, I'll call it, that use kettlebells similar to bodybuilding, whatever. If they're familiar with something and they see you lifting, like we're going to lift today, they might go, oh, you do GS. And they say that because in this country, GS, Kettlebell Sport, is very new. So you don't have a lot of really high-level lifters in this country. You just don't. In Russia, they'll start you out in grade school, and you'll start lifting. And by the time you're in high school, you're going to be lifting 2 32-kilo kettlebells, which I didn't bring in. They're 70 pounds each for 10 minutes. That's high school age into college. That's like Olympic level athletes. In this country, we've all kind of just discovered it, and a lot of us that are learning it are already well into our 30s and 40s, and it's a lot harder to kind of get up that curve when you're starting late in life as opposed to early. So in this country, you see a lot of people doing kettlebell sport. They're not lifting super heavy weights yet. You don't see a lot of guys lifting 32s these days, the 32 kilobells. There's becoming more and more as we're getting smarter and learning how to train. Because we're fortunate that we have Russian coaches actually coming over to this country now teaching us how to do